The grand hall of Nexus Prime Station stretched out like a crystal cathedral in space. Lights from distant stars filtered through the transparent dome overhead, casting soft colors across the assembled diplomats. Representatives from 100 worlds moved through the crowd, their forms as varied as the planets they came from. Some walked on legs, others floated, and a few simply existed as clouds of organized energy contained in specialized suits. Kung. Minho stood near one of the tall windows, watching a blue nebula swirl in the distance. He wore the simple gray uniform of Earth's diplomatic corps, a small flag patch on his shoulder, the only decoration. At 34 years old, he had been doing this work for 6 years now. 6 years of learning to smile when aliens looked down on his species. 6 years of being patient when others were not. "There are more people here than last year," Commander Park Ji-woo said, appearing beside him with 2 glasses of something that looked like water but definitely was not. She handed him one. Minho took it carefully. The Velkari Empire brought a larger delegation this time. "I heard their princess is here." "Princess Ilareth," Gi-woo confirmed. "She's young by their standards. Only 98 years old." Minho almost smiled. "A teenager, then." "A teenager who will one day rule an empire that spans 400 worlds?" Gi-woo reminded him. "Try not to upset her." Across the hall, a group had gathered around someone tall and elegant. Princess Ilareth wore robes that seemed to glow with their own light, shifting between blue and purple like oil on water. Her skin was pale silver, and her eyes were large and dark. She moved with the confidence of someone who had never been told no in her entire life. "Ambassador." Lee Sumain approached Minho and Ji-woo. She was a small woman with gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "The Velkari are holding court. We should pay our respects." Minho nodded and followed his ambassador across the crowded hall. Other species moved aside to let them pass. Some watched with curiosity. Humans were still new to the galactic community, only 30 years since first contact. Many species had been traveling between stars for thousands of years before humans even invented writing as they approached. Minho could hear Princess Ilareth speaking in a voice like bells. She was telling a story about something that had happened on her home world. The other diplomats listened with careful attention. When you were speaking to someone whose empire could destroy your entire civilization, you paid attention. Ambassador Lee bowed in the formal style of the Velkari. "Your Highness, may I introduce Kong Minho, our specialist in cultural exchange?" The princess looked at Minho the way someone might look at an interesting insect. "Ah, yes. The humans. I have read about your species." She turned back to her audience. "Did you know that their entire recorded history is only about 10,000 years? My family's summer palace is older than that." A few of the aliens made sounds that might have been laughter. Minho kept his expression neutral. This was not the first time someone had pointed out how young humanity was. "We are indeed a young species, Your Highness," he said politely. "But we are eager to learn from our elders in the galactic community." "Learn," the princess repeated, as if tasting the word. She stepped closer to him. Even with her unusual height, she had to look up slightly to meet his eyes. "Tell me, human, does your species even have a word for patience? Or have you not lived long enough to understand the concept?" The gathered aliens fell quiet. Commander Gi-woo shifted her weight slightly, a movement Minho recognized. She was ready to step in if needed. Ambassador Lee's face showed nothing, but Minho knew she was calculating the diplomatic cost of whatever was about to happen. "We have such a word," Minho said calmly. "Several, actually. Patience is considered a virtue in most human cultures." "A virtue you've had barely any time to practice," Princess Ilareth continued. Her voice was pleasant, almost friendly, which somehow made her words cut deeper. "Your entire civilization could rise and fall in the time it takes my people to complete a single opera. We have theatrical performances that have been running continuously for 3,000 years. Can you imagine?" "No, of course you cannot." Us. A small creature that looked like a collection of crystals chimed softly, a sound of discomfort. A diplomat from the Mektar Consortium, a species known for their politeness, seemed to be trying to change the subject. But the princess was not finished. "I studied your kind before coming here," she said, walking in a slow circle around Minho. It was required reading for my diplomatic training. Do you know what I learned? That you only just learned to leave your birth world. Children playing with starship toys, stumbling about the galaxy like infants who have learned to crawl. Minho stood very still. He focused on his breathing, on the weight of his feet against the floor. An old technique his grandmother had taught him when he was young and quick to anger. Princess. Alareth stopped in front of him again. Perhaps in another 10,000 years, you will have something worth saying to your betters. Until then, maybe your species should listen more and speak less. Learn your place in the order of things. The silence that followed was heavy. Even the constant background noise of the hall seemed to fade. Minho could feel dozens of eyes on him. Some species expected humans to be violent, primitive. Others wondered if he would grovel, try to apologize for existing. Minho looked at Princess Ilareth for a long moment. He studied her face, her eyes, the way she held herself. She expected something from him. Anger, maybe, or fear. Some kind of reaction she could use to confirm what she already believed about humans. Instead, Minho bowed his head slightly. Not a full bow of submission, just a small acknowledgement. Then he turned and walked away. He did not hurry. He did not look back. He simply left his footsteps steady and measured on the crystal floor. Behind him, the silence seemed to grow even heavier. Commander Jiwoo fell into step beside him after a moment, and Ambassador Lee followed. None of them spoke until they were well away from the crowd. That could cause an incident, Jiwoo said quietly once they were in a side corridor. No, Minho replied. His voice was calm, but Jiwoo knew him well enough to hear the effort behind that calm. Sometimes the most powerful response is none at all. She insulted not just you, but all of humanity. Jiwoo pressed Minho, stopped walking and looked at his friend. And if I had responded with anger, I would have proved her right. If I had defended us, I would have looked desperate for her approval. By walking away, I gave her nothing to use against us. Ambassador Lee nodded slowly. The boy is learning to be a diplomat at last. I am 34, Minho said. Exactly, Lee replied with the hint of a smile. A child by galactic standards, but perhaps that is not always a disadvantage. She looked back toward the grand hall. That princess has likely never had anyone simply walk away from her before. You have given her something to think about, or made an enemy, Jiwoo muttered. Perhaps both, Minho admitted. He looked down at his hands and realized they were shaking slightly. He closed them into fists, then relaxed them. I need some air. We are in space, Jiwoo pointed out. Then I need whatever passes for air on this station, Minho said. I will be in the observation deck if anyone needs me. He walked away before either of them could respond, his footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. Behind him, he could hear Jiwoo and Ambassador Lee talking in low voices. But he did not stop to listen. In the observation deck alone, except for the stars, Minho finally allowed himself to feel the anger he had been holding back. His hands gripped the railing hard enough to hurt, but he did not shout. He did not curse. He simply stood there, breathing slowly until the anger faded into something else. Sadness, maybe. Or just exhaustion. He had walked away because that was the right thing to do. But right and easy were rarely the same thing. Princess Ilareth turned to her quarters after the reception and found herself unable to sleep. This was unusual. She had insulted lesser species before and never given it a second thought. But something about the human's reaction bothered her. She kept replaying the moment in her mind. The way he had looked at her, calm and measuring. The way he had simply turned and left without a word. No anger, no defense. No groveling. Just silence and departure. What did you expect him to do? She asked herself aloud in the empty room. Her advisor, Lord Vescarn, had contacted her before she retired. His hologram had flickered in her sitting room, his ancient face creased with concern. I heard about your exchange with the human diplomat, Your Highness. It was hardly an exchange, she had replied. I merely stated facts. The humans are different, Vescarn had said carefully. There are reasons the Council admitted them to our community so readily, despite their youth. What reasons? But Vescarn had only smiled his cryptic smile and ended the call. Now Ilareth lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering what he had meant. The next morning brought a new surprise. She accessed the diplomatic network expecting to find formal complaints from the human delegation. Her father would not be pleased if she had created an incident on her first major mission. But there were no complaints. No demands for apology. The humans had said nothing at all. In fact, when other delegations asked Ambassador Lee about the incident, the older woman had simply smiled and said, "Young people sometimes speak without wisdom. It happens in all cultures." Then Ji Minho's entire family. The failure had been traced to faulty components, manufactured by a Valkyrie company. Princess Ilareth felt something cold settle in her stomach. The man she had insulted, the man whose species she had mocked as primitive, and short-lived, had lost his wife and child because of her people's negligence. She read further. After the disaster, Minho had not sued for compensation. He had not demanded justice. Instead, he had written a proposal for improved safety standards in multi-species engineering. The proposal had been adopted and was now standard practice across the galaxy. When reporters had asked him why he had not sought retribution against the Valkyrie company, his response was in the file. "My family would not want their deaths to cause more pain. I would want them to prevent future tragedies." She closed the file and sat in darkness for a long time. The next day, there was a cultural exhibition in one of the station's public spaces. Princess Ilareth found herself drawn to the human section, though she told herself it was merely diplomatic curiosity. Commander Park Ji-woo was there, standing before a reproduction of an ancient painting. The image showed a bare tree on a cold mountain, everything covered in snow. But if you looked closely, there was a single bird perched on one branch, and the tiniest hint of a bud beginning to form. "Your companion walks away from insults," the princess said, approaching Ji-woo. "Is he a coward?" Ji-woo turned to her, and for a moment, the princess saw something fierce in the other woman's eyes. But then Ji-woo smiled sadly. "Minho?
Ow?
He is someone who learned that not every battle needs to be fought. That silence can be its own form of strength." "Strength?" Princess Ilareth scoffed. "It seems like weakness to me." "Tell me, Princess," Ji-woo said, her voice quiet but firm. "What did you accomplish with your words at the reception? Did you gain respect? Form an alliance? Teach anyone a lesson?" She paused. "Or did you just make noise?" Princess had no answer. Ji-woo gestured to the painting. "This is 500 years old. It is called Waiting for Spring. The artist painted it after a long war destroyed his home. See the bare tree? The cold mountain? Everything looks dead. But look closer. That bird. That tiny bud." The artist understood something important. "What?" the princess asked, despite herself. "That silence and patience are not weakness. They are the foundation of endurance. Spring always comes, but you have to survive the winter first. Sometimes surviving means knowing when to fight and when to simply wait." Princess Ilareth looked at the painting for a long time after Ji-woo left. She thought about Minho walking away in silence. She thought about his family. She thought about what strength really meant. And for the first time in her long life, she wondered if perhaps she had been wrong. The emergency alarm woke everyone on Nexus. Prime at what the station considered morning. Princess Ilareth rushed from her quarters, still fastening her formal robes, her heart pounding with a fear she did not want to name. Emergency alarms meant danger, and on a space station, danger usually meant death. The council chambers were already crowded when she arrived. Diplomats from every species pushed into the room, speaking in dozens of languages. The translation system struggled to keep up, creating a wall of overlapping voices that made her head hurt. Silence. Scholar Tharn's voice cut through the chaos. The crystals stood at the center podium, their crystalline form reflecting the emergency lights. "We have received a distress signal from the civilian transport Bright Journey. The ship suffered catastrophic system failure in the void marches and is losing life support." A holographic display appeared above the podium, showing a map of local space. The void marches was a region everyone avoided, a nightmare of spatial anomalies and unstable stellar phenomena. Ships that entered rarely came back. "How many aboard?" someone asked. 214 souls, Scholar," Thurn replied. Including Velcari citizens? Princess Illareth felt her blood go cold. Her people were on that dying ship. The Council fleet can reach them in 3 standard days, announced Admiral Korth of the Mektar Consortium. His voice was grave. Fortunately, according to their last transmission, they have less than 30 hours of breathable air remaining. The chamber erupted into discussion again. Various species offered suggestions. Some proposed sending robotic drones, but drones could not make the complex decisions needed to navigate the void marches. Others suggested experimental teleportation technology, but no one had successfully teleported that many beings across such a distance. "They are as good as dead, then," said a delegate from the Korthon Supremacy. The statement was matter-of-fact, not cruel. Just a recognition of reality. Princess Illareth wanted to scream at them. These were lives, not statistics. But what could she do? Her own people's fastest ships were days away. Even her father's personal yacht, which was in orbit around the Velcari homeworld, could not reach them in time. There may be another option. The voice was quiet but clear. Kong Minho stood near the back of the chamber, one hand raised slightly to request permission to speak. Ambassador Li stood beside him, her face unreadable. The human vessel indomitable. "Is docked at this station," Minho said, walking forward through the crowd. "It is a modified exploration ship, designed for navigating hazardous regions. It is fast and maneuverable. We can reach the bright journey in 20 hours. Admiral Korth pulled up specifications on his display. The ship is lightly armed and has minimal shielding. The void marches will tear it apart. Maybe, Minho agreed. But it is the only ship here that can reach them in time. You would risk your crew for strangers. The Korthan delegate sounded genuinely confused. This is not logical. The probability of success is low. The probability of success if we do nothing is 0, Commander Jiwoo said, stepping up beside Minho. We have to try. Scholar Thurn's crystals hummed with thought. The Council cannot order you to undertake such a dangerous mission. This must be a volunteer action. Ambassador Li looked at her 2 officers for a long moment. Princess Illareth saw something pass between them, some understanding that needed no words. Then Li nodded. The Indomitable will launch within the hour. The chamber exploded into discussion again, but Princess Illareth barely heard it. She watched the human delegation leave to prepare their ship. Minho walked past her without looking in her direction, but she saw his face. It showed determination, but also something else. Fear, maybe. He knew this was dangerous. He was afraid, but he was going anyway. Why would they do this? She whispered to Lord Vescarn, who had appeared at her side. Because they are human, the old advisor replied. And humans, for all their faults, have one quality that makes them dangerous and valuable in equal measure. They refuse to accept that some things cannot be done. The next 20 hours were the longest of Princess Illareth's life. She stood in the observation deck with dozens of other diplomats, all watching the sensor displays that tracked the Indomitable's progress through the void marches. The human ship appeared as a small blue dot, weaving through a maze of red warnings that marked spatial distortions, radiation bursts, and collapsed stellar remnants. Twice, the blue dot disappeared completely as the Indomitable passed through regions where sensors could not track them. Both times, Princess Illareth found herself holding her breath until the dot reappeared. Other Velcari nobles stood nearby. Duke Talcarin, her father's military representative, watched with his arms crossed. "The humans are reckless," he muttered. "They risk too much for strangers." Scholar Thurn, who had also come to observe, made a sound like wind chimes. Or perhaps they understand something we have forgotten in our long ages. The value of action over deliberation. The audio feed crackled. With static, then Minho's voice came through, calm despite the obvious strain. Indomitable to Nexus Prime. We have visual contact with the bright journey. Beginning approach now. Everyone in the observation deck leaned closer to their displays. Us. The sensors showed both ships as dots, now blue and yellow, slowly moving together through a field of deadly red. Then alarms screamed through the feed. Energy surge detected, Jiwoo's voice reported, tight with tension. Massive gravitic wave approaching from stellar remnant 79. R4. Red on the display suddenly expanded, a wave of distorted space rushing toward both ships. If it hit them, the gravitational forces would tear the vessels apart like paper in a storm. "We need to abort," someone on the Indomitable said in the background. "Negative," Minho replied. "We are not leaving without them." "Goo, can you get us to the bright journey before the wave hits?" "I can try." Princess Ilareth watched the blue dot accelerate. It moved faster than should have been safe, threading between spatial distortions that would have trapped a larger, less maneuverable ship. The yellow dot grew larger on the display as the Indomitable closed the distance. "Docking in 30 seconds, Jiwoo announced. 20 seconds. 10 contact." The two dots merged into one. "We have them," Minho said, beginning evacuation. "Giwoo, how long until that wave hits?" 8 minutes. "Can we get everyone off in 8 minutes? We're going to find out." Time seemed to slow down. Princess Ilareth stared at the display, showing the merged dots and the approaching wall of red. 8 minutes to evacuate more than 200 beings. It was not enough time. It could not be done. But the humans were doing it anyway. The channel filled with voices. Minho coordinating the evacuation. Jiwoo monitoring the approaching wave. Other human crew members helping refugees move through the docking tube. Someone was crying. Someone else was praying in a language the translator could not identify. 5 minutes, Jiwoo warned. "We are not done yet," Minho replied. "Keep the tube open, Minho. If we do not leave now, I know. Keep it open." Princess Ilareth realized her hands were clenched so tight that her fingers hurt. Around her, other diplomats watched in silence. Even Duke Talcrin had stopped criticizing and simply stared at the display. 3 minutes, almost done. 50 more people. 2 minutes. "Minho, we are out of time." 30 more. "Keep it open. The wave is going to hit us." "I know. 20 more." "Move, people. Move." The princess could hear the strain in Minho's voice now. Fear and determination mixed together. She thought about his file, about his family dying in space. He knew what was about to happen if they did not finish in time. He had lived through it once already, but he was not running.
10 more.
"Come on, 60 seconds, Minho." 5 more. "Go, go, go." "Last one is through," a new voice reported. "Tube is clear." "Disconnect now?" Minho ordered. "Giwoo, get us out of here." The merged split back into two. The blue dot accelerated away, while the yellow one remained still, dead in space. The wave of red reached the yellow dot and swallowed it. The bright journey was gone, but the blue dot was moving, racing ahead of the wave's expansion. For long seconds, it looked like the Indomitable would not make it. The red crept closer and closer to the blue. Then the blue dot crossed some invisible line, and the red wave stopped expanding. The Indomitable had escaped. The observation deck erupted in sounds of relief. People cheered in a dozen languages. Someone started crying. Duke Talcrin uncrossed his arms and let out a breath he had been holding. Princess Ilareth just stood there, trembling. "Indomitable to Nexus Prime," Minho's voice came through, rougher than before. "All refugees secured. Returning to station. We took some damage, but life support is stable. Arrival in approximately 18 hours. Scholar Thurn responded immediately. "This is Nexus Prime. Excellent work, Indomitable. Medical teams will be standing by." 18 hours later, the observation deck was crowded again. But this time, people had come to greet heroes. Not witness a tragedy, the Indomitable limped into dock, its hull scarred and burned. The airlock opened, and refugees began emerging. They were supported by human crew members who looked exhausted but alive. Medical teams rushed forward to help. Princess Ilareth stood in the crowd, watching. She saw Valkyrie merchants stumble out, crying with relief. She saw a species she did not recognize, all saved from death. She saw Commander Jiwoo, her face bruised and her uniform torn, helping an elderly being down the ramp, and finally, she saw Kung Minho. He was the last to leave the ship, making sure everyone else got off safely first. His face showed exhaustion and pain. His left arm was bandaged, but his eyes were calm. He stood at the bottom of the ramp, looking at the crowd of grateful refugees and relieved diplomats. His gaze moved across the faces and stopped when he saw Princess Ilareth. Their eyes met. And this time, she was the one who looked away first. For 3 days after the rescue, Princess Ilareth tried to write a message to Kong Minho. She would sit at her desk in her quarters, pull up a blank communication screen, and stare at it until her eyes hurt. Then she would delete everything and start over. The problem was that she did not know what to say. How do you apologize to someone you have deeply insulted? Especially when that person had then risked his life to save your people without asking for anything in return. I am sorry seemed too small. Thank you seemed too simple. Every word she tried felt inadequate. On the 4th day, she gave up on writing and simply sat in silence. And in that silence, she began to understand what Minho had been trying to show her all along. Sometimes words were not enough. Sometimes they were not even necessary. She requested a private meeting with him. To her surprise, he agreed. They met in one of the station's observation lounges, a small room with transparent walls that looked out onto the nebula NGC 7293. The colors were beautiful. Pink and blue and purple swirling together in the vast darkness. Minho was already there when she arrived. He stood looking out at the nebula, his hands clasped behind his back. He was not in uniform today, just simple civilian clothes. It made him look younger somehow. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me, Princess Ilareth said. He turned to face her and nodded slightly. Of course, Your Highness. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them like a bridge neither knew how to cross. Finally, the princess took a breath and said, the only thing she could think of, I owe you words, but I find I do not know which ones. Minho regarded her calmly. His eyes were dark and serious. Then perhaps start with why you are here. Because you were right to walk away from me, she said. The admission felt like pulling thorns from her own throat. And because I was wrong to speak as I did, why were you wrong? Minho asked. The question surprised her. She had expected him to accept her apology, or perhaps to reject it. But he wanted to understand her reasoning. Because I insulted you and your species without cause, she replied. Because I was cruel when I should have been diplomatic. Because my words were meant to make myself feel superior rather than to accomplish anything useful. Those are good reasons, Minho said. But I think there is something deeper. He gestured to the chairs near the window. They both sat, still watching the nebula outside. Princess Ilareth felt exposed in a way she had never experienced before. This human saw through her in ways no one else ever had. I have been taught my whole life that age equals wisdom, she finally admitted. That my species' longevity makes us superior. That the order of the galaxy is based on how long civilizations have existed. She paused, gathering courage. When I see younger species like yours achieving in decades what took us millennia, it threatens something I have built my identity upon. Fear, Minho said softly. Yes, the princess whispered. Fear that perhaps we are not as special as I was taught. Fear that maybe the advantages we have are just accidents of biology, not proof of superiority. Minho was quiet for a moment. Then he asked, Do you know why I walked away that night? I thought it was discipline. Control, partially Minho acknowledged. But mostly, it was because I saw someone young, privileged, frightened, that the galaxy was bigger than she had been told. Someone lashing out because they felt small. He looked at her directly. I was angry. Yes. But I was also sad, because I recognized something of myself at that age. Before I learned what true strength was. What is true strength? Princess Ilareth asked. Being better than you were yesterday. And sometimes that means walking away from a fight, choosing silence over the satisfaction of being right. The princess felt tears forming in her eyes, which shocked her. Valkyrie rarely cried. It was considered undignified. But she could not stop them. I read your file, she confessed. I know about your family. About the Sejong. About how they died because of faulty parts made by my people's company. Minho's expression shifted slightly. Pain flickered across his face before he controlled it. I see. When I insulted you at the reception, I did not know, the princess said quickly. If I had known, it would not have mattered, Minho interrupted gently. You should not need to know someone's pain before you treat them with respect. The words hit her like a physical blow because they were true. She had been cruel to him, not knowing his story, which somehow made it worse. She had judged an entire species as inferior without ever trying to understand them. How did you survive it? She asked. Losing them? I mean, how did you not become filled with hate? Minho looked back out at the nebula. When he spoke, his voice was distant, remembering. I did hate. For a long time, I hated the company that made the parts. I hated the inspectors who approved them. I hated the universe for taking my family from me. What changed? I realized that holding on to anger was only multiplying the pain, he said. My wife Yuri was kind. She worked as a teacher. She believed in building things, not destroying them. And my daughter Nabi, he stopped, swallowed hard. Nabi wanted to be a doctor. She wanted to help people. If I had spent my life seeking revenge, I would have dishonored everything they stood for. Princess Ilareth wiped her eyes, not caring any more about dignity. I do not know if I could be that strong. But it is not strength, Minho said. It is survival. Humans have a saying, an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. We have lived that lesson. Our history is soaked in the blood of people who could not let go of grievances. He turned back to her. We learned slowly and painfully that the alternative to forgiveness is not justice. It is extinction. You forgave the people who killed your family. I chose not to let their deaths become an excuse for more pain, Minho corrected. That is not quite the same as forgiveness. But it was enough to let me keep living. They sat in silence for a while, watching the nebula. Princess Ilareth felt something shifting inside her, some old certainty crumbling away to reveal something new underneath.
Ice.
What can I do? She asked finally. To make amends? Minho considered this. Nothing to me. But you could do something for those refugees you did not think were worth saving. 3 days ago, you were in that council chamber. Do you remember what you thought when you heard about the bright journey? The princess flinched. I thought about the Valkyrie citizens aboard. I did not think much about the others, exactly, Minho said, but without cruelty. Just stating a fact. So do something about that. Advocate for better emergency response protocols. Use your privilege for something beyond pride. There are Valkyrie on the committee studying the Drexani petition. Support them. Not because they are old enough or wise enough by your standards, but because they deserve a chance to grow. I will, Princess Ilareth said. And she meant it. Minho stood and she rose as well. She expected him to leave then, to end the meeting now, that he had said what he needed to say. But instead he hesitated. Would you be willing to speak with me again? The princess asked before he could go. Not as an apology, but because I think I have much to learn from humans. From you, Minho studied her face for a long moment. She forced herself to meet his eyes, to show him that she was sincere. Yes, he said finally, but on one condition. Come as Princess Ilareth. Not as a Valkyrie superior speaking to a human inferior. Come as someone who wants to understand, not to be validated. I can do that, she said. Then, with a slight smile that felt strange and new on her face, she added, I think your philosophy is contagious. Diplomat Kang. You have made me think in silence more in 3 days than I have in years of speaking. Minho smiled back, just a little. Silence is underrated. After he left, Princess Ilareth stayed in the observation lounge for hours, watching the nebula and thinking. She thought about strength and wisdom and what it meant to be superior. She thought about her long-lived species and what they had accomplished in their 40,000 years. They had built an empire. They had mastered technologies that seemed like magic. They had created art and music that lasted millennia. But had they learned what it meant to truly grow, to change, to admit when they were wrong? Humans had only been in space for 30 years, but in that short time, they had learned lessons that some species never learned in thousands of years. They had learned that youth was not weakness, that admitting fault was not failure, that sometimes the strongest thing you could do was walk away, and that silence, properly used, could speak louder than any words. Princess Illareth pulled up her diplomatic terminal and began writing. Not a message to Minho, but a formal proposal to the Council. A proposal for new emergency response protocols, for better support of younger species, for reforms in how the Council evaluated petitions for membership, she wrote through the night. And for the first time in her long life, she felt like she was doing something that actually mattered in his own quarters. Kong Minho sat at his desk and pulled up a photo he kept locked in a private file. Yuri and Nabi smiled out at him from a moment frozen 6 years in the past. A picnic on Earth, before they had boarded the Sajong. Before everything changed, "I met someone today," he said to the photo, as he sometimes did when he was alone. "A princess who thought she knew everything. She reminded me a little of myself when I was younger, arrogant and scared and hiding it behind words." He touched the screen gently, tracing the outline of his daughter's face. "I think she is going to be okay. I think maybe we are all going to be okay. The galaxy is full of young species and old species, but maybe that does not matter as much as we all think it does. Maybe what matters is whether we are willing to grow." He sat there for a long time, remembering and hoping. Then he closed the file and went to bed. Tomorrow he would have more work to do, more committees to attend, more barriers to break down between species who did not understand each other yet. But tonight, for the first time in a long time, he felt like maybe the work was actually making a difference. The committee meeting 3 weeks later felt different. Princess Illareth arrived early and took her usual seat, but this time she had actually prepared. She had spent hours reviewing the Drexani petition, studying their culture, reading their history, not to find reasons to reject them, but to genuinely understand them. Kong Minho arrived a few minutes later with Commander Jiwoo. He nodded to the princess. A small gesture of acknowledgement, and she nodded back. It had become their routine over the past weeks. Small conversations after meetings, shared meals in the station cafeteria, discussions about philosophy and culture that lasted hours. They were becoming something the princess had never had before. "Friends," Scholar Thurn called the meeting to order. "Today we vote on the Drexani petition for council membership. We have reviewed all materials. Does anyone have final comments before we proceed?" Duke Talcrin, who had been on the committee since before Illareth was born, spoke first. "I maintain my position. The Drexani are too young. They lack the wisdom that comes with age. We should table this petition for another 1,000 years. Several older members nodded in agreement. This had been the expected outcome. Young species rarely gained approval on their first petition. "I would like to speak," Princess Illareth said. The room went quiet. Everyone turned to look at her. Duke Talcarin's expression showed surprise and something else. Disapproval, perhaps. The princess had been known for her conservative views. Her support would have helped reject the petition. "I have studied the Drexoni carefully," Illareth began. Her voice was steady, though her hands trembled slightly under the table. 3 weeks ago, I would have agreed with Duke Talcrin. I believed that age was the primary measure of a civilization's worth." She paused, gathering her courage. "I was wrong." The silence in the room became absolute. Admitting error was not something Valkyrie nobles did publicly. "The Drexani have qualities that many older species lack," the princess continued. "They have survived 17 major conflicts and chosen peace each time. They have developed technologies through cooperation rather than conquest. Their society values education and personal growth over rigid tradition. These are not the traits of a civilization that needs more time. These are the traits of a civilization that has already learned the most important lessons." Duke Talcorn's face darkened. "Your Highness, with respect, you are young yourself. Perhaps you do not fully understand. Perhaps being young gives me a perspective that is valuable." Illareth interrupted, her voice firm. "I am 98 years old. By our standards, I am barely an adult. But I have learned more in the past 3 weeks than I learned in the 98 years before them. And what I learned is this: wisdom is not about how long you have lived. It is about what you choose to do with the time you have." She looked directly at Minho, who sat quietly listening. He gave her the smallest nod of encouragement. I vote to approve the Drexani petition, Princess Illareth said clearly, and I recommend that this council reevaluate our standards for membership. Age should be a factor, but it should not be the only factor. Character matters. Intention matters. The willingness to grow and learn matters. Scholar Thurn's crystals hummed with approval. Well stated, Your Highness. Does anyone else wish to comment? Minho raised his hand. I support Princess Illareth's proposal. The human delegation votes in favor of the Drexani petition. One by one, other members spoke. Some agreed with the princess. Others sided with Duke Talcrin. When the vote was called, it was close. But the petition passed by a margin of 3 votes. After the meeting ended, Duke Talcrin approached Princess Illareth in the corridor outside. His expression was cold. Your father will hear about this. You have embarrassed our people by siding with humans and other young species. My father sent me here to learn diplomacy, the princess replied calmly. That is what I am doing. If he is displeased, he may tell me himself. The Duke left without another word. Illareth watched him go, feeling a mixture of fear and satisfaction. She had made an enemy today, but she had also done the right thing. It was brave, Jiwoo said, appearing beside her. Talcrin has significant influence at your father's court. I know, Illareth admitted. But if I have learned anything from humans, it is that doing the right thing is more important than doing the safe thing. The Drexoni delegation will be pleased. This vote will change their entire civilization's future. And maybe others as well, the princess said. If the Drexani can gain membership despite their youth, it sets a precedent. Other young species will have hope. They walked together through the station's gardens, a large biodome filled with plants from 100 worlds. It was one of Ilarus's favorite places, peaceful and full of life. I have been thinking about that painting Jiwoo showed me, the princess said as they walked. The one called Waiting for Spring. What about it? Jiwoo asked. I think I understand it now. The bird does not return because winter is over. Winter ends because the bird returns. Small acts matter. Individual choices matter. One person speaking up can change the weather. Minho smiled. That is a good interpretation. I also think, Illareth continued, that I have been waiting for spring my entire life without realizing it. I thought my life would begin when I became empress, when I was old enough and wise enough to rule, but life is not something that begins later. It is happening now. They reached a bench near a small fountain and sat together. The sound of water was soothing, mixing with the soft rustle of alien leaves. My father has sent me a message, the princess said after a moment. He wants me to return home. My diplomatic training is complete. Jiwoo and Minho exchanged glances. When do you leave? Jiwoo asked. In 3 days. Illareth looked at both of them. But I have made a request. I asked my father to assign me as a permanent cultural liaison to Earth. I want to spend time on your homeworld, to learn more about humanity and... Minho prompted. He agreed. He said that establishing stronger ties with Earth is strategically valuable. Though I think he also hopes that spending time there will help me understand why I have been acting so strangely lately. Strangely? Jiwoo laughed. Is treating other species with respect considered strange in your empire? It can be, the princess admitted sadly. We have been powerful for so long that we have forgotten what it means to be students. But I want to remember. Or rather, I want to learn it for the first time. Minho looked thoughtful. Earth is very different from what you are used to. It is crowded and chaotic. Humans are loud and emotional and sometimes irrational. You will probably find it overwhelming, good Illareth said. I have been comfortable for 98 years. It is time to be uncomfortable for a while. Ow. The 3 days passed quickly. Princess Illareth spent them preparing for her departure and saying goodbye to the various diplomats she had worked with. Many were surprised by the changes in her. Some approved. Others did not. She found that she did not care as much about their opinions as she once would have. On the last evening, she hosted a small private dinner in her quarters. Just Minho, Jiwoo, Ambassador Lee, and Scholar Thurn. They ate food from Earth, simple dishes that the humans had prepared in the station's kitchens. Illareth found it strange, but pleasant. "I want to thank you all," the princess said when the meal was finished. "Especially you, Minho. You taught me something important without ever trying to teach me. You just lived according to your principles and let me figure it out for myself." "Sometimes that is the best way to teach," Ambassador Lee said. "Direct instruction can only go so far. People have to discover truth on their own to really believe it." "What will you do on Earth?" Scholar Thurn asked. "I want to study human history in detail," Illareth replied. "Not just the victories and achievements, but the failures and mistakes. I want to understand how a species so young has learned so much. And then I want to bring those lessons back to my people." "That is ambitious," Jiwoo said. "Your nobles will not make it easy." "No," the princess agreed. "But nothing worth doing is easy." Another human lesson. Later, after the others had left, Minho and Illareth stood together on her balcony overlooking the station's interior. Thousands of lights sparkled below them, representing thousands of beings from hundreds of worlds all living together in relative peace. "I insulted you when we first met," the princess said quietly. "Called your species primitive, mocked your youth. And you responded by saving my people without asking for anything in return. Why?" Minho was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. "Because that is what you do when you can help. It does not matter if someone has been kind to you or cruel. It does not matter if they are your friend or your enemy. If you can save a life, you save it. Anything else is just choosing to let people die out of spite. Most species do not think that way." "I know," Minho said. "And that is one of the things that makes humanity both frustrating and valuable. We refuse to accept that some things cannot be done. We refuse to believe that some people are not worth saving. It makes us reckless. It gets us killed. But it also makes us who we are." Princess Illareth turned to face him. "I am grateful that I insulted you." Minho raised an eyebrow. "That is an unusual thing to be grateful for. Because if I had not insulted you, you would not have walked away. And if you had not walked away, I would not have been forced to think about why that bothered me. And if I had not thought about it, I would still be the same person I was before. Arrogant and small, and hiding behind tradition." "You were never small," Minho said gently. "Just young. And there is no shame in being young, only in refusing to grow." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the lights below. After a while, the princess said, "When I arrive on Earth, will you show me that painting? The real one, not just a reproduction." "Waiting for spring was destroyed in a war 400 years ago," Minho said. "The reproduction is all that remains. That is sad." "Yes," Minho agreed. "But also fitting in a way. The painting was about hope surviving despite loss. Even though the original is gone, its message remains. That is a kind of immortality, too." Princess Illareth smiled. "I have spent my whole life thinking that immortality came from living for thousands of years. But maybe it comes from making a difference in the time you have. My species will remember great conquerors and ancient emperors. But we also remember the person who invented agriculture, the person who wrote the first peace treaty, the person who chose compassion over revenge. Those people changed the world," Minho said. "Not through force, but through example." "Like you," the princess said simply. Minho shook his head. "I am just a diplomat who lost his family and decided to honor their memory by trying to prevent others from experiencing the same loss. Nothing special." "Everything special," Illareth corrected. "Because you turned grief into purpose, pain into healing. That is alchemy of the highest order." The next morning, Princess Illareth boarded her transport ship. A small crowd had gathered to see her off, which surprised her. Apparently, word of her changed perspective had spread. Some of the younger diplomats from various species came specifically to thank her for supporting the Drexani petition. Minho and Jiwoo were there as well. No formal speeches, just quiet goodbyes between friends. "I will see you on Earth in 2 months," the princess said. "We will be ready," Minho replied. "Fair warning, Sol is very different from Nexus Prime. I am counting on it." As her ship pulled away from the station, Princess Illareth looked back at the massive structure growing smaller in the viewport. She thought about the person she had been when she arrived. Proud and certain and wrong about so many things. She thought about the human she had insulted. The man who had turned away in silence, and through that silence, taught her more than all her tutors combined. She pulled out her personal journal and began to write, "I insulted a human, expecting rage or submission. He gave me neither. Instead, he offered me something more valuable, silence that spoke volumes, and eventually, words that taught me to listen." Perhaps humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy is not their technology or their passion. It is their hard-earned understanding that sometimes the most powerful response is restraint, and the most profound wisdom is knowing when to speak and when to simply walk away. I am 98 years old. By the standards of my people, I am barely an adult. But I have learned that age is not measured in years. It is measured in growth. And today, finally, I have begun to grow. She closed the journal and looked out at the stars. Somewhere among them was Earth, a young world with a young species who had learned lessons that would change the galaxy. And she was going to be part of that change. The thought terrified and excited her in equal measure. But then again, anything worth doing usually did.